Hello and welcome to Jackalcast, my irregular long-form podcast-style series focused on anything that interests me. This episode runs adjacent to my Rumoang series, which looks to predict and speculate on Warhammer releases of a fantasy flavour. To help you decide if this is even worth the attention of your ears, I'll be chatting about the following 4 things, and I'll slap down some chapter breaks once this thing's uploaded. So first up, the curiosity that is the Warhammer Age of Sigmar roadmap at the moment. Games Workshop's mystery trademark of 2024, Warcry, and ending on Fyreslayers and Dwarfs. Let's crack on. Right, hello, I'm David, or Hobby Jackal, or whatever, Dave. So a little context when I make a Rumoang video. I like to keep things punchy, and I also really like to focus on things I think are really likely to happen, so that means no good rumours, no Rumoang video. So as a viewer, I've personally been a bit stung by what is arguably okay content, but where it feels like I need to watch 2 or 3 clickbaity videos to get a rumour that's kind of a bit tangible. Now, notably and openly, this is not a Rumoang video, nor do I intend it to be clickbait, hence this explainer. I'm going to be chatting about 4 curiosities for whatever reason I don't feel quite meet the threshold to feature in one of my main videos, but which I do think there's still something interesting to say about them. Finally, before I actually bloody get on with this is designed to work both as a video and a podcast, so if I do use imagery, I'll be descriptive. So feel free to stick this on and go and eat a sandwich or go to the loo, or do both at once. I know my audience. So the Warhammer hobby landed in 2025 with a bang. And the first preview of the year was on the 17th of January at the Las Vegas Open. And as a reminder, the reveals were chocker, there was loads. There were Black Library miniatures, the High Elves for Warhammer the Old World, more Ashwaste Nomads for Necromunda, cool Beastmen Shaman for the Old World as well, different flavours of Space Marine, and a chonking great reveal for the Soulblight Gravelords, getting a host of Death Rattly goodness and a magnificent new zombie dragon. Now, as well as all of this, we also got a roadmap, a nice clear roadmap that sort of split things down into now, coming next, and on the horizon, and also ended with a cool tease. Now in the now section we got Orruk War Clans, Gloomspite Gits, Soulblight Gravelords, and Path to Glory. Coming next we had Idoneth Deepkin and the Nighthaunt, and following this 3 images which the internet quickly identified based on artwork were going to be Blazercorn, Caradron Overlords, and the Flesh Eater Courts. The teaser image then showed some creepy eyes, and if you zoomed into one of the eyes there was a little symbol of Hashut. There's been lots of hints in the lore, in the books, in publications, etc. that the Chaos Dwarfs, or the something of Hashut, or the Duardin of Chaos and Hashut, are going to be arriving this year. Then a whole 10 weeks later, on the 27th of March, we have the Warhammer preview at Adepticon. Now, given we were told they were coming next 10 weeks prior, I assumed that we would be seeing some new miniatures for both Idoneth Deepkin and the Nighthaunt, and I made that prediction. What I didn't predict was that we were going to see no new minis for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And this is the first time that I can find where they've advertised a preview event featuring a mainline logo, so that's 40k or Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and they're not showing a single new miniature. Now, I aim for this channel to not be negative, and I'm not being negative here, I'm just surprised. I actually thought the preview as a whole was absolutely amazing. I was blown away by Cathay, and I really didn't expect to see them at that preview. In fact, I didn't expect to see Beasts of Chaos, Wood Elves, and Cathay for Warhammer the Old World, and then no new minis for Age of Sigmar. So it was just felt a little bit odd based on the previous way they've done these previews, especially when advertising a line. And we did get some cool stuff for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, but it did leave some of the community that was purely there for that game feeling a little bit disappointed. Now, what we did get was 4 new Spearhead boxes, a new Spearhead book, in a Spearhead set with new cards and a double-sided board and terrain recycled from the Warcry starter set, and to be honest, it looks much more suitable for Spearhead because Warcry is just much more fun when there's height levels and things like that going on. So in terms of a preview where we don't see new miniatures for a mainline range, I've got a couple of reasons where I think that perhaps wasn't the original intention for this preview. Firstly, just that they've done a whole load of previews before, and this has never happened before for Warhammer 40,000 or Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And another good reason is they produced the new roadmap, which sort of slightly contradicts the one from 10 weeks prior. So here we see once again, under the Now section are the Soulblight Gravelords. Now at the time of recording, they've gone up for the pre-order announcement online. So they are finally here now, but we were told now 10 weeks ago, which isn't very now. Also listed is the new Spearhead box, Sand and Bone, which looks really cool. Like Spearhead, it's a great game mode. And also the General's Handbook. Now the slightly weird thing about this one appearing now is that during the video, I believe, they said this was coming out in the summer, which I believe is pretty much the standard for General's Handbook. Doesn't feel super now. Now there's a few ways to interpret this. It could be that now means in this quarter. So they used to split up roadmaps by seasons, and it used to be the British seasons, so winter, or the meteorological seasons. So December, January, February would be winter, March, April, May, spring, and so on. Interestingly enough, they do shuffle things up through the rest of this roadmap, giving us an indication as to where those other ones are falling. We've got Idoneth Deepkin, we've then got Blades of Khorne, full art image this time, we're told it's officially them. Haradron Overlords, same thing, and then the Nighthaunt. Now, interestingly, Flesh Eater Courts then go to On the Horizon, and there's no mention again of the teaser they snuck in for Hashut. Now, were I the marketing team within Games Workshop, I would probably know where these previews are coming up through the year, and I would not intentionally produce a roadmap that would say something's coming out now to then produce another roadmap 2.5 months later saying something's coming out now again. Now, I also do need to reflect, I've worked for big organizations before where bureaucracy runs riot, where you've just got a lot of people working on things with a lot of different factors. And these things can just happen. It's a big organization with lots of moving parts. Could have been a mistake, could have been unintentional, could be that Soulblight were never intended to come out before now. However, for fun's sake, let's assume that they were supposed to come out between these two previews, and that Nighthaunt and Idoneth Deepkin were going to be those miniatures previewed at Adepticon, which is why Warhammer Age of Sigmar got full billing. Now, another reason to suspect that this version of events may be true is their release schedule. Every army, or nearly every army, a little bit more on that later, is expected to get a new battle tome this edition. Warhammer games run on a 3-year edition cycle, and we're already 9 months down on this edition. Additionally, the final 6 months or so of those 3 years tend to not feature battle tome releases. Now, this is for 2 reasons. One is probably goodwill. You don't want to buy a battle tome which is then outdated by a new edition so quickly. And secondly, they tend to fill this gap with a big narrative campaign releasing books and miniatures for all sorts of factions, which will lead us into the next edition of the game. So to maintain this furious release schedule, they need to release 10 to 11 battle tomes in 2025, and the same again in 2026. We've had 3 so far in the form of the Orruk War Clans, the Gloomspite Gits, and now just creeping in the Soulblight Gravelords. The next preview that we know of isn't until May, and that's on the 22nd of May at the Dallas Open. And this all leads me to believe that they probably had stuff that they wanted to show at this preview and just didn't get around to it because things are getting a little bit tight to maintain that release schedule. And generally at the moment, they like to use these preview events to show off these battle tomes and whatever's coming with them. They don't tend to just drop onto Warcom. So on the 22nd of May, what we may see is Idoneth Deepkin, Nighthaunt, Blades of Khorne and Haradron, maybe all landing at the same preview event. And what this does seem to suggest is that, if not that, we've got a chocker remainder of the year for Warhammer Age of Sigmar releases. After the May preview, we can probably expect to see something in July. The 4th of July 2025 is the 10-year anniversary for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and it feels deserving of a splash. Perhaps they're holding back some of these reveals for then. So why might they make changes to an advertised preview? It could be anything. As I said, it could be a mistake. Or there could have been a dissemination or production issue, not necessarily on Age of Sigmar. Maybe something else was ready and filling warehouses and they're like, let's bloody get rid of this cafe lot. They're taking up all the room. People will want these. You know, it could be anything, if it is even a thing. So let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, and I do value comments from the community, and they do inform future content. Right, so here's a fun one. In April, 15th of April 2024, Games Workshop trademarked the word or term Mosscairn. That's M-O-S-S for Moss and C-A-I-R-N for Cairn. Now instantly you might jump to the assumption that this is something like Warhammer Underworlds because it has that kind of naming convention of those boxes. Now what's particularly curious here is that none of the Warhammer Underworlds boxes or names or Warcry or even Kill Team boxes appear to have a trademark against their name, which does seem to single this out as something potentially quite special. Now when you do look through their recent trademarks, you find things like Sylvaneth and Skaven, Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, oodles of 40k factions and specific Space Marine chapters, and mainline games such as Warhammer the Old World, Warhammer 40,000. This does make Mosscairn an outlier, so what could it be? Could it be a completely new game? Now in the next section I'm going to be chatting a little bit about Warcry, and there are some small concerns in the community that perhaps this game is going. Let's say if that is the case, this could be something to follow it. Or it could be a new edition of Warcry. If that is the case, we remain left in this slightly funny area of asking, why did they trademark this particular name when they don't trademark that much? Now this is where I'm hoping that you, the community, can offer some insight. Would they trademark a word if, say, they'd pumped a decent amount of money into producing something, they were quite a way along, and then, as is the case for Mosscairn, there is actually a fantasy roleplay type thing on Kickstarter which bears the same name, so maybe it could just be an Underworld season. They got partway into development and then were sort of like, oh, this looks a bit iffy, let's trademark it. I don't know if that's realistic, I'm not a legal eagle. Let's stick to the exciting idea that it might be something brand new. What do we know about Mosscairn? Well, a clever person on Reddit identified it as a location in Ghyran, the realm of life in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Redditor relative_war4477 stated that in February 2024, White Dwarf 497, there was a passage about Mosscairn. The rolling hills of Mosscairn are studded with the grave sites of those who fought and died to keep Ghyran from falling to chaos completely. This is a dank, moody place shrouded with mist and fog, constant drizzle keeping it wet and glistening at all times. Those unprincipled thieves who have sought the grave goods of those buried there have more than once met a fatal surprise. For the energies of Mosscairn give life, even to the dead, and the wights that lie there do not suffer trespassers gladly. Which is really cool. It sounds almost like it could be a Warhammer Age of Sigmar Mordheim-y type setting, maybe. There's enough sort of grim elements to it. I'd be intrigued to know what you think. And as you can tell at this point, this video is much more speculative than my previous stuff, but you know, it's all cool. On to Warcry. Warcry, a game close to my heart. It is my favourite game produced by Games Workshop at the moment, is in an interesting place. We had a rumour circulating that local suppliers of Games Workshop products were being told that Warcry was being pulled back, and supposedly there was an email that went to them saying, you know, as per the Warhammer community article, we're asking you to return Warcry stock. I then predicted on a community post that, hey, we're probably going to get a Warhammer community article about Warcry, how exciting. Because we did see more online suggesting that, yes, things were being sent back. What then happened was we didn't get a Warhammer community article. That email maybe didn't exist or it was a mistake. What's curious is that email was being talked about before the stock seemed to be returned, and Warcry then went completely online on the Warhammer store. Now this all caused me to get sacrificed by the Warcry Discord team while we were trying to pull this apart and work out what was going on, because I got it wrong. There was no Warhammer community article, and thankfully I got better. What we've seen since is that when listing tournaments and things for national events at the moment, Warcry has just sort of fallen by the wayside. Now this could mean a couple of things. So we are due the 3rd edition of Warcry this summer. As I've said, these systems tend to go on 3-year cycles. Underworlds was slightly weird on that front. But Warcry for its 1st and 2nd one did these 3-year iterations. Additionally, if we're looking on the positive side of things, Kill Team did have stock returned as it was gearing up for its next edition. Although I don't think I ever saw Kill Team as a whole going online only on the store. And there is a part of me that thinks you could still run tournaments for this thing and specify we're using 2nd edition rules or whatever in the pack that you send out. So it's in a little bit of a funny place, and people are slightly suspecting that perhaps as the releases have also gone completely silent, this could represent the game going away or being replaced with some kind of other skirmish game. Now Warhammer 40,000 has Kill Team and Necromunda as its sort of spin-off games. It also has Combat Patrol as its equivalent of Spearhead for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, so that's not really skirmish but a smaller version of the massed battle game. Were Warcry to go away, we would still have Spearhead, but again it's very much an entry point to full-on wargaming. Underworld, which is a little bit of a strange one. It's kind of a board game, card game, really small warband hybrid, but it's not quite a skirmish game, so it would leave a potential gap for onboarding people into a nice, easy game they can pick up and play. Now, Necromunda is not run by the main studio, but it's run by the Specialist Game Studio. And there's a lot of talk as to what would happen. It does feel like if Mordheim were ever to return, or a spiritual successor, it's much closer to kind of Necromunda and would suit itself well to a few plastic kits and then a load of really weird oddities in resin, which would suit the Specialist Game Studio and their style of releases. Lots of speculation. What do you think's happening? And just to say, we have no reason to be super negative until we are told otherwise. It could just be a quiet period before Warcry 3rd edition arrives, if it's going to arrive. My feeling is if we hear no more about it come the May preview, as we would be expecting the next edition in summer, we may take that to assume that either Warcry is not getting a 3rd edition, or they're stepping back from the 3-year cycle for whatever reason, and it may reappear at some other point in the future. The final thing to say on Warcry is that some of their releases perhaps haven't lent themselves as well to the game as they could have. Now, I love Warcry, but a few times I've wanted to, but I haven't bought Warcry products because they didn't do what I needed them to do, and I didn't recommend them to people that I wanted to get into Warcry because I didn't think they quite did what they needed to do to help somebody get into Warcry. So with the 1st edition, in year 1, we got the core set, absolutely brilliant, chock full scenery that can be built in lots of different ways. You could buy 2 boxes and build the stuff up if you wanted to. It came with Chaotic Beasts, it came with 2 full warbands, the full core book, all the cards, dice, everything you needed. Then a year later, they released Catacombs, which is a fantastic way to play Warcry. However, I didn't buy the box, or I didn't until it was discounted, because half of the contents were exactly the same as the core set. So half the sprues were that same scenery again, which really you can build in interesting ways. But they had the same core book in there, as well as a little book covering the Catacomb side of things, and it was priced about the same. And so you fundamentally had a lot less kind of stuff. You didn't have the Chaotic Beasts, and there's a lot of duplication for me if I were to buy a larger box. So I'd recommend that one to a new player, but it wasn't worth me buying doubles of a lot of the stuff I already had at that point for that amount of money. Fast forward another year, we get Red Harvest, another fantastic box. Like that was a heavy box. There's a lot of scenery in there, it was really cool. 2nd edition arrives. Heart of Ghur, meat trees, slightly Marmitey, so some people kind of loved or hated them. And something that was maybe perhaps a little bit of a risk for Warcry at this point was that they were then featured in every single box for that year. And the following year, there were individual bits of scenery and another set of scenery that sort of riffed on it. Although it was different enough that I think it might have won some people over with more Seraphon ruins, that kind of thing. What was a slight shame was that in comparison to the 1st edition, where we got these quite different repackaged scenery sets to play Warcry in different settings, they didn't re-release those or offer anything that could give somebody a different look to a Warcry board, which was a little bit of a shame when it was such a niche look. Now, I think Heart of Ghur was fantastic. I picked it up. I still need to finish painting my trees, but it was a nice, different way to play Warcry, and the 2nd edition finessed and polished things beautifully. They also did something slightly weird with a compendium book, and one of my earliest videos was about this, where they said the compendium book was getting a print release, and then they said it wasn't getting released, and released a free PDF version of everything. And then the following week, they released the print version. So it was a slightly odd way to try and sell something. I like getting things for free, but I sort of think if you want to sell a Warcry book, maybe just release it 3 months and then release some free stuff, or I don't know, there was some mixed messaging. So I wanted, regardless, I wanted the sort of the book, but there were some issues there. And then in the middle of the run of this edition, there was the starter set, which I think perhaps wasn't quite fit for purpose. It was costed the same as the Kill Team starter set. However, the Kill Team starter set had 2 full kill teams, scenery and everything, whereas the Warcry one costed the same. It had a paper mat, 2 half warbands pulled from Underworld, so not enough to make a full Warcry warband, so you can buy the starter set, and then you can't play Warcry, you can just play the starter version of Warcry. And some lovely push-fit scenery, but which offered no opportunity to stand on it or climb it and that kind of thing, which is fundamentally quite a fun part of Warcry. The Warcry is a skirmish game of yelling parkour and throwing yourself off or over things. I just feel like there were some missed opportunities there. I'm assuming the price was pushed up by not reusing existing scenery, but there was presumably a desire to make something that was push fit work here as a nice entry point for new players. I think another thing that was maybe a little bit of a shame was that the 2 warbands taken from Underworlds, they could have been chosen from, say, a single Grand Alliance, so 2 Order warbands, 2 Death warbands, which when you're learning the game you can fight against each other. But once you've done that, if you want to rock up to a Warcry group, you can combine them, and there's rules to make them into a single combined warband, which is legal for play around 1,000 points, and you can just go. You've got something from your starter set. You can go and play Warcry. So the trickiness there was that it was quite expensive for what you got. I already had some of those warbands anyway myself, and I think to any of my friends I was trying to get into the game, I was kind of like, you could spend that money in much better ways to get a better starting set for Warcry, even buying from Games Workshop themselves, which just felt like a little bit of a shame and a lost opportunity. The final thing to note on this is that compendium, those PDFs and things, pulled in any number of models from almost the entirety of Age of Sigmar ranges from pretty much week 1 or 2 of Warcry 2nd edition existing. Meaning that if Games Workshop internally was trying to gauge how popular is this Warcry, they presumably only got the purchasing of Warcry boxes, which contain large amounts of, I think, superb scenery, but according to the community were Marmite, so that's the meat trees. Warbands that sort of fit into Age of Sigmar armies, but arguably you don't need to be able to play Warcry. You can use stuff from your existing collection, make really interesting warbands that are often more competitive than the bespoke Warcry warbands released for the game. So this sort of reached this point that there could be a massive community of people playing this fantastic game who do not need to buy the product. So then this possibly becomes a problem for us, the consumer, as well, because why support that product if it looks like people may not be buying it? This is a lot of speculation, and we do not have the numbers to back this up, but it's one way of looking at why Warcry might possibly go. To end on a positive note, if it were to go, much like Mordheim before it, I imagine it has a life of its own. The rule set's fantastic, it's available for free online. The stats are also available for free online for thousands of fighter profiles. The website Warcry is absolutely fantastic. Optimal Game State, I've forgotten his name, made a really nice way to build your own Warcry cards, which I've used as well. So if you like using the cards in the game, I think it's great for new players. That's a brilliant site and tool. It's in a perfect position to just go off into the wild and become its own thing with a vibrant community. What do you think's happening with Warcry? Let me know. Right, it's time to double down on double Duardin and chat about Fyreslayers and Chaos Duardin or Chaos Dwarfs. I'm chatting about Fyreslayers because there's a rumour that occurred quite a while ago that I've not covered on my channel, because if I did cover it, I wanted to cover it with some context, much like I just did for Warcry. This is all rumour, and until it's not rumour, it's not real. For somebody that shares rumours, who has a good track record of sharing correct rumours, a rumour sharer called White Fang Back Me Up, who's correctly named releases such as the Soulblight Zombie Dragon and Gitmob Doomdiver and Skaven releases, has sort of popped up to just say that Fyreslayers aren't getting a battle tome this edition. This has caused some concern in the community, but there's a big lack of clarity as to what this really means. There's still a chance that Fyreslayers may be merged into something else. They may get a big update. So for the sake of argument, say an Orruk War Clan situation happened. Chunky-ish release of something like the Cruel Boys, or, you know, the Duardin that were hanging around the cities of Sigmar, maybe getting merged in with them. They plopped into existence. You then wouldn't have a Fyreslayers battle tome per se. You might get a Duardin, I'm not good with Duardin names, but a Grimnir or whoever, a book named For the Collective Duardin. So that potentially could exist while simultaneously making no Fyreslayer battle tome a correct rumour. This is all assuming this is correct. It's in an interesting position, and it does make you wonder if perhaps it will be combined with Caradron, or doesn't necessarily mean it's going away, but they are just not getting a battle tome this edition, only to hit the next edition hard with a brand new battle tome, or something else. On a positive note, there's 100 clues that the Chaos Dwarfs are arriving. I don't think those two are going to be smushed together because it's a bit yin and yang. I can't see them working together. Aside from a love of fire, but it's a bit weird. Saying that, we do have things like the Daughters of Cain and the Slaves to Darkness, where there are two factions within one book actively acting against each other. So there's Krafusa acting against Marathi in the Daughters of Cain, and then you've got Be'lakor acting against the interests of Archaon in the Slaves to Darkness. I just think it's a bit weird to think the Fyreslayers could go that way, but, you know, it's not impossible. Now, Chaos Dwarfs, we've had the teaser images at the LVO at the very end. I think this could be like a bull's head, like an evil bull. A lot of people are just like, that's not Chaos Dwarfs at all, shut up. But if you zoom in near the eye, there is the little symbol for Hashut, and they've included Hashut in the Age of Sigmar core book that released Skaventide, and there's little Chaos Dwarf icons throughout, and the Horns of Hashut warband released at the start of second edition of Warcry were described as the sort of scouting parties, the initial forces that went out before the Chaos Duardin. And the Cruel Boys, Hobgrots, are said to trade with them and get their weapons and armor from them, which is all in the same vibe. So yeah, basically we're expecting them later this year, and on the roadmap they're suggesting they come after Flesh Eater Courts. Now, as we've already seen with those roadmaps, they are interchangeable, so whether it actually goes in that order or not is anybody's guess. I did wonder if they were going to appear as an April Fool's kind of teaser like they did for the Votan, but as people have rightly suggested on the internet, they perhaps wouldn't do the same thing again because it sort of takes away the fun of the April Fool's being, is it actually an April Fool's or not, because they've done it before. So yes, interesting news for Duardin fans. Let me know what you think for the Fyreslayers and the Chaos Duardin, and that marks the end of this Jackalcast. If you made it this far, bravo to you. If you like this, then do feel free to like and subscribe, you weirdo. And as I've suggested throughout, I do love hearing your comments. They do factor into my future predictions and musings. And I'm endlessly thankful for the Hobby Jackal community. And also a special thanks to the TGA forums, who are just excellent, lovely bunch of very smart people when it comes to this kind of stuff. Thanks for listening and or watching. Cheers. Have a good day.